Hello there. What is going on, everyone? We are back at it with the triumphant return of Double Critical. Hopefully, you guys are doing well today. We're going to talk about a couple of different things since this is the first episode and also being a live episode. We'll be able to take some feedback instead of like season one where we had yeah, I'd have like a different guest or it was, like I wanted to do this one more interactive, more engaging with you guys, the viewers, and I'm trying different things. I don't know what time slot is going to work best for the future of doing Double Critical. I'm gonna try, and because I've been going through a lot lately. I'm gonna try and see what works and see what doesn't work. We've got an extra dog in the house now. It's a little bit wild and crazy. Just trying during the day. I don't know if the day's gonna work or not. That things are a little different right now. There may be some dogs barking in the background, and hopefully we'll get that under control. But we're gonna talk Armada today. I want to make Double Critical not just be about Legion like it was before. I want each week to be a different game. And the idea is the first Sunday of the month will be Armada, or the second Sunday of the month will be Legion, the third Sunday of the month will be X-Wing. And that's kind of what we want to start off with. That's kind of how I envision this going. And then I guess we'll kind of go from there. So one of the first things I want to talk about is just overall news, because one of the things before I kind of slowed down on daily videos, I would talk about news and updates and things like that every day. So for those of you around the world who've already gotten your Armada Wave 10 stuff, I am envious and congratulatory to you. Here in the United States, where I currently reside, we only have the Invisible Hand. With the Republic ships, the Pelta and the Venator are coming May 28th, or the end of May, basically the last Friday in May, which is May 28th. So we've got a long way to go. We are in May now, though, so that much is good. And we are still waiting on the Recusant, which is currently set for coming out in June. So this last wave of Armada is kind of all over the place. It's also an uncertain time for Armada, where there's no other, like there are no dedicated Armada developers with Atomic Mass Games right now, and so we don't really know what the future is going to hold. We don't know if they're working on any new stuff for Armada. We can certainly assume that it would be beneficial to work on more stuff for Armada, but I know a lot of people, myself included, are used to having this reassurance that, it's a slower release schedule, but plenty of stuff is still in the pipe. And right now, I think a lot of people want that communication from Atomic Mass Games. I think they want that reassurance that this game is still a priority, that it's still going to get attention, it's still going to get development, and I think we're fine with slowdown. But I think, so Atomic Mass, if you're watching, or if anybody does, has any interactions with them, let them know. That's all we really want right now, is just that nod, that communication, that reassurance. I think that's one of the things that we often felt, at least I often felt, because maybe I'm, just a little bit more fortunate because I do get to talk to a lot of the FFG folks related to everything that's going on, and so that's certainly always something that we had. But hopefully we'll get some good news for that. We got a super chat from Jason Adkins. Thanks, Jason, for supporting the channel. I really appreciate you, because I need that communication. I understand. I need it to. On one hand, so I want to talk a little bit about like AMG has certainly has a different way of doing communication, a different way of doing a lot of things, and so like they do the live streams, they do the painting videos, they do a lot more social media updates. They don't do like the articles that Fantasy Flight did. I was a big fan of those style of articles. I definitely did like those. But I need some more, some just more human style interaction. Like I need somebody to to grab me with both arms, hug me, and tell me it's gonna be okay. The sun will come up tomorrow, right? And of course I'm being a little dramatic with that, but that's kind of I think where I'm at. I think it's where a lot of people are at. A lot of people, are just wondering, what the future is gonna hold, because there's a big long development process that goes into making these games, and even when Fantasy Flight's development staff, the old staff was still on hand, constantly working on Armada, we already had a kind of like a one release per year type of schedule, and now, that we've had probably a year of delay, in between like the handover and then kind of waiting to get more people brought on and for a new project to start up again. How long are we going to be looking at, because of this huge hiccup? And this hiccup isn't due to COVID-19. Part of it is, for sure. Part of it is. But this hiccup is due to this, seemingly last-minute transition from Fantasy Flight over to Atomic Mass Games. And Armada is not the only game that is going to, feel this type of, hiccup and like kind of big pause in development. A little part of me, if it wasn't for the global situation with Armada's Wave 10, I would think that they deliberately slowed this down. Do you remember a long time ago, I had said something that I thought the Wave 10 was being split up, and there were a lot of people who doubted what I was saying, certainly things didn't happen exactly in the way that I was originally told, but I think the Recusant was originally supposed to come out with the Invisible Hand, but I think that got split up even further. But I think the original plan, at least for the United States, was to have the two Separatists come out one month and then the two Republic come out the next month. And I think the Recusant is the one thing that kind of broke that up. But what's strange to me is why they would do that just for the United States and not for Canada or anywhere else in the world. That I really get confused by the way that they do distribution and all of that. But it's, for what it's worth, it kind of lessens the dead space in between waves. If you remember, this stuff was originally supposed to come out in January. Right. Originally it was supposed to come out in January, and now we're going back a year and a half now too. Not long after Armada Clone Wars was first announced, they had that Gamma interview with Steve Horvath, and he talked a lot about the future plans for a lot of these games. And that's kind of what I'm looking for from Atomic Mass Games, is that kind of that feels good kind of, dude, we got everything planned. We have a great plan. We got a great lineup. We're working on these games. Don't worry. He even gave Imperial Assault people some comfort, reminding them that Imperial Assault is not dead, that Imperial Assault's story is not yet complete. And that's like and that's not even given any kind of hard information. That's just telling, people to calm down. It's okay. And I think that's all we want for playing a game like Armada, that is a continual expansive type of game where there's going to be new expansions, more expansions, and things like that. We want to hear that the game is still supported. We want to hear that the game has more expansions in development. We want to hear all of these things, and so that's what is missing right now. And I think a lot of it right now they don't know, but I'm starting to, and for a long time I just gave Atomic Mass Games the benefit of the doubt. But if we don't hear something by Gen Con's time frame about the future of Armada, that's when I'm going to start to kick my paranoia up a notch. Because, look, I gave them the benefit of the doubt for a while, but dude, like, you've had some time now. Like, you should be working on that next wave. Right, like that next wave should have, if I was in charge, the next wave would be, mostly done right now and getting ready to move into playtesting. So hopefully playtesters are being called soon, and things like that. Now, I don't really playtest these games anymore because I did that once upon a time, but it made it difficult to talk about and do speculation and stuff like that. So I wouldn't get called if there was playtesting for this stuff, but hopefully some people are. So let's move on to talk about some other cool things related to Star Wars Armada. We're going to talk space stations today, which is a fun thing to talk about because it was it mentioned. I don't know if it was hinted at, but it was definitely suggested by folks, including me, in the past, and along the lines of, and it kind of received optimistically. So I feel like that's something that could potentially happen. And for those of you who've never seen Double Critical before, what is Double Critical? What do we talk about with Double Critical, and what does it mean, and what do we try to do here on this particular show? It started off with Star Wars Legion, and the first season of Double Critical, my friend Sean and myself were kind of talking Legion full time because that's probably the main game that he and I play together, and started off talking about what if there was a die that had 2 crits on it. And Armada was actually a lot of the inspiration behind this, because Armada has dice that have 2 symbols on them. The red dice in Armada have 2 hits. They have the double hit, the double hitical, right? Hashtag double hitical. That's funny. But yes, throw a hashtag double hitical in the chat if you're still following along, if I haven't put you to sleep yet. But then also you have the black die, which has the hit and critical. And so I loved that about Armada, that you had that chance of really excellent stuff. And so I always loved that. I was like, what if we had something like that in Armada? How would you do, or in Legion rather, how would you do it? And I said, well, before Darth Maul came out, I'm like, well, what if Darth Maul has a surge to double critical, which is kind of where this shirt came from, as far as the there we go. There we go. So that's where the double critical shirts kind of came from, and this whole movement of there we go. There's double hiticals. What's going on, everybody in the chat? I hope you guys are having an exciting day today. Darth Dalton asks, are you excited for The Bad Batch? No, but I'm absolutely going to watch it. The only reason I'm not excited is because I've had a very stressful and difficult month, and The Bad Batch is basically next week is a really, really tough and busy week for me, for things completely unrelated to Star Wars and or YouTube. I just have a lot of other things in my life going on next week that completely take The Bad Batch out of the equation. Once next week kind of comes to an end and everything goes well, I'm going to be feeling really, really good, and then I'll be able to sit down. I mean, I may watch The Bad Batch if I can manage to, but yeah, I've got a lot of stuff going on, and that's kind of one of the things that led to me kind of slowing down my YouTube video output for this past month. So those of you guys who've been watching for a little while, a lot of that stuff has been going on. So it's been pretty tough. It's been a very stressful month, but taking a little time off. And by the way, you guys have been really awesome. The community has been really supportive and everything, so I really do appreciate that. But yeah, slowing down a little bit, it's given me kind of some breathing room and has really helped. So I don't know if I'll get back to doing daily videos, what the schedule is going to be, but I do like the outlet that having double critical, or rather double crit, come back, because it gives me the opportunity to talk about all those little things that I might have done into daily videos, and it probably gives a lot of you guys the opportunity to kind of catch up on a lot of my just ramblings and hot tips and hot takes and this, that, and the other thing about these games. So I think if you just want to watch one video a week, this might be the one for your specific game. Now, I'll probably post more information on Crabbok.com. If you haven't already been to my website, I think you should check it out, because we've got a lot of free content up there, like the Armada AI expansion is there on Crabbok.com. But since we're going to be talking about space stations today, also that's something else that you can find at Crabbok.com, as I have a Deep Space Nine expansion for Armada, and the idea of that is I just picked up the Deep Space Nine model from WizKids, the deep cut version, repainted it, said this is so cool, wouldn't it be cool to find rules for it or to use it in a game? So I made up a base and a unit card for it, and I even made a scenario to go with it, and it's not bad. It's a different way to play, and it can just be a fun little one-off. And so it kind of that leads into another topic that I want to talk about today also, and that's like custom homebrew ships and homebrew rules and stuff like that. If you've seen my KDY custom ships from EC Henry's reimagining of ships from Star Wars, where I mistakenly said Star Trek for what apparently, and I don't know how that happened. Like I said, it's been very stressful, and so little things like that have been creeping out a little bit more often. So that's I just got to smile and laugh a little bit at things like that. So, but yeah, so so Double Critical started out as a podcast and YouTube show for Legion. I'm not doing the podcast version anymore, although this audio could still be listened to in podcast format. But I won't use Podbean anymore because apparently there was another company that had the name Double Critical that threatened a lawsuit, and Podbean just took the whole podcast down. They took it down and locked me out of my account, but still continued to bill me for the podcast that was now disabled and banned. And so I don't know how any company could justify denying you a service, not telling you about such denial, just keeping it completely in the dark, and then continuing to bill you for the service that you're not allowed to get, and also you're not being told that you're not allowed to get. So, I was furious about that, because that's where people who wanted to, listen to the podcast, that's where they would get it from, and they just didn't. They didn't do it. They didn't get into it at all. Austin says you would get into Armada if they reprinted the upgrade card collection. I know a lot of people are complaining about the upgrade card collection. A lot of things out of print. Armada has always suffered from new players trying to get in that can't get one thing or the other thing, and I knew from the get-go the upgrade card collection was going to be in demand. We actually gave one away. It was one of our 12 days of Life Day giveaways, was the upgrade card collection for Star Wars Armada. As I knew that was going to be one of those things that, because every player needs one, but most players will need at least two, considering there's certain cards in there you definitely want more than one of. And some players will want more than two, especially for larger games. Granted, you can still use all your old cards, so I have a lot of my old cards kind of on standby for those games where I need a lot of copies of linked turbo lasers and things like that. But yeah, they will come back in. I used to have a position in gaming that I did not like proxies, and I did not like people kind of proxying this and printing out their own cards to use, buy the stuff. But I no longer hold that position. By all means, just print out the cards, bring a printed list. I don't even care if you don't own that many copies of, Spinal Armaments or whatever. Just print it out. Come on, let's play. Let's just have fun playing the game. I'm not really worried about which cards you own and which cards you don't, when they cannot keep the game's product in stock. And that's another reason why I'd be really surprised if Atomic Mass Games did not prioritize the continued development and printing of Star Wars Armada, because this game's product sells out instantly. I have never seen Armada products sit on shelves for long at all. It always sells out everywhere that I've ever seen. And so it seems to me like it's a high demand game. And now entering the Clone Wars with these new factions, they are fire. They're really exciting. And so it's a good place for Armada to be right now. But they need to get with the, they need to ramp up production just a little bit, maybe more than a little bit. The Architans too is another one. Those were one of the first ships to be sold out everywhere. And that's because any kind of small ship that's going to be good in swarms, people are going to want to buy 3 and 4 and 5 of. I had 6 Architans at one point. I realized, you know what, I'm not going to run 6 that often. So I returned one to the store so somebody else could buy one. But, I just they didn't make enough. They didn't count that on people wanting 5 and 6 Architans in their fleets. And I think I lent a little bit of that because I had a lot of success with Architans. But yeah, it's just crazy. All right, so I want to get onto the main topic of today's episode, the return of the double critical, and we're going to talk space stations. So, how would space stations work? And this is kind of what double critical does: is I'll take something that's a little bit crazy, a little bit wild, like, hey, what if dice had a double critical? How would that work, right? And Armada kind of already has that with, like, look, they've got double sides on red and black dice. You know, the black dice is closest to having it because it's got the black dice with the critical on there, and it might as well be a double critical because 2 criticals still counts as just 2 damage that happens to have the critical effect. Or the Nebulon kind of also, the Nebulon title Salvation, that one kind of is a double critical if it rolls that crit out the front, right? So, and that's another reason why I'm calling this double crit in the title, is to avoid lawsuits too, because I can't imagine how somebody could, copyright double critical or whatever, but because it's not a crit. It seems like there's such a generic term, like really good. Oh, like you can't say really good. Anyway, so this is just double crit, the double crit show. So. But yeah, so what we're going to talk about today is like how would space station type expansions work for Star Wars Armada? And like while that might sound a little crazy, like maybe that's not something we need because this is about fleet maneuverability. We take that into consideration, and then we kind of talk about, well, all right, but how would it work if it could? Like if it wasn't going to be quite so crazy, how would you make it work? And I think there's a couple of ways to be able to make something like a space station work. First off, I think they would be expensive because space stations are big. So one cool thing is they'd probably be something kind of a larger box, kind of like how the Super Star Destroyer had that kind of it wouldn't be as big as a Super Star Destroyer, but I think they'd be kind of around the size of like the way Deep Space Nine is. So like basketball size, like big expansion, that could be one option. They could also make smaller space stations that literally just take the place of terrain on the game board. Now, I know a lot of people will do that. There's a lot of like Etsy shops, a lot of terrain manufacturers, and a lot of people that run asteroids, debris fields, and space station miniatures to kind of sit on top of the obstacle for Armada. And I think that's pretty cool. That's a cool thing. So I think there's already some demand for 3D printed or physical space stations on the board. And so that's definitely a cool thing just to have visually. I'm a very visual player, and I like visual. Scarif comes to mind. Yeah, absolutely. Scarif does absolutely come to mind. And I know there's people who've made the shield gates as well. So there's a lot of different forms that a space station type or space terrain might come in. And one form might just be in these simple aesthetics. Now, at least with Fantasy Flight, they didn't have... There was some kind of legalese, and they never, just plainly came out and said it. But the impression that I got was that they couldn't just make terrain, because their license wasn't just for terrain. I think that would be a different category of licensing, so they couldn't just make a terrain piece. But the way they got around that, because Legion does have terrain that FFG made, the way they got around that is by putting a card in there with it's like, oh, this terrain has a special scenario. So really they're selling you the scenario, and the terrain piece is just a complement to the scenario, right? So so I think that's kind of how they could swing it, kind of like a Legion Battlefield terrain expansion. They could do that for Armada, just kind of taking the place of all the basic obstacles. They could have stuff like that, 3D versions of all of those, and maybe with that they put in some new scenarios. And I think that could work. That'd be a very basic, simple, straightforward, easy way to do it. What I'd like, and maybe that's the first step, maybe they kind of test the waters with that, but what I'd like is for alternative space stations, and this could come in multiple formats. So I think the Scarif Shield Gate is a great opportunity to have one that looks different, and have one that would play different. Like, it wouldn't have to go on a stand, right? Because it would be beneath everybody else. So you can make it kind of like a flatter piece of terrain. And if any ship touches it, they crash into it and are destroyed. All right. Like that would be really cool. And maybe they destroy the shield gate with them, so you have like the defending team and the attacking team, and maybe the attacking team wants to ram a ship into it. So like there's a really cool type of scenario you can do with that. And then it becomes kind of like a game of football. Like, keep them out of here. We can't let and maybe it has its own firepower too. That's kind of similar to how my Deep Space Nine scenario is on Crabbok.com. You have the wormhole straight from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, right behind the space station, and everybody's trying to like fly through because they're trying to get their ships through the wormhole. And even if they have only one hull left, if they escape out of the wormhole, they gain victory points. And so you're trying to stop them. The station also fires, plus all your ships. You're trying to keep them from getting through the wormhole, because then they might make contact with the Dominion or whatever, or maybe they'll detonate a bomb inside the wormhole or something like that. So it's kind of cool. So that's maybe one option for a station. But another option, there's a lot more stations in Star Wars now that we are into the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars animated series really featured a lot more space stations and space station type scenarios, like the space hospital where Grievous was attacking. Like that's a perfect example. You can have like defend the station. You already have a mission kind of like that, so it would work if it was a stand-in for that. But you could have new scenarios based completely on that. Maybe if it's a hospital specific type station, maybe your discardable crew, or your maybe it can ready your exhausted crew, or maybe you can use it to get a crew that you've had to discard back. Like you use an Ezra Bridger, he's gone for the game, but now you can get him back. Like what? Maybe it's a once per game thing. So there's a lot of cool, new capabilities that a station scenario could give you. And so I feel like we have got a lot of different models to make this work as well. But there's not also I don't think all stations need to only be objectives. I think a station should be potentially something that you add to your fleet. Also, now this is where it gets a little more wild and crazy, because adding a space station to your fleet doesn't sound like the way traditional Star Wars Armada is played. Because this is like a fleet versus fleet. Nobody goes to battle and brings a station with them. Well, I guess, well, in Star Wars Resistance, they kind of did with the Colossus, right? So, because that was a mobile station. And technically Deep Space Nine is mobile too. And I'm going to reference Deep Space Nine every once in a while, because it does really give us excellent, I guess, framework for how space station combat would work, in a war or in an Armada type scenario. Even though it's Star Trek rather than Star Wars, it's like the definitive source. It's the ultimate source of space station combat. So I think you have to, any conversation that you're going to have about space stations in Armada, I think have to come to talk about Deep Space Nine at some point. Yes, the Death Star was a mobile station. It was very mobile. It was slow, but it was mobile. So that, space stations can be mobile. And that does bring the question as if you're going to make space stations, do you do a Death Star? I don't think so, but I can't say I'd ever really be on board with something like that. But since this is the double crit, we can certainly explore that possibility. How would a Death Star actually work on your tabletop like that? I think you could potentially have it represented like it's here, but it's really far in the background, right? Like there's a playmat already that has the Death Star there. Or you could have a part of it that's just like the side, like something that kind of goes up against the side of the board and doesn't move, and it's just that super laser. Kind of like how the Solar Corona objective works, and you just pick one edge of the board. You can say that the Death Star is on that edge, and you can even give it like a partial miniature just to look really, really cool. It would almost be like a flat surface. You could have like a little bit, kind of like a satellite dish that you would just kind of like line up next to the board. It would look really cool. It might be really expensive, though. That would make it really expensive when it wouldn't be that hard to probably engineer something like that. You just take an old satellite dish, drop a bowling ball on it, boom. Now you've got your thank you. Now you've got your your little super laser and stuff. I'm like, oh, my wife just brought me a boba tea, so I'm gonna have a sip of this real quick and catch my breath.
Should have gotten no boba, so you didn't have to chew on. Sorry, think of it.
No boba. Boba Fett.
There is boba.
Boba tea. They should have a Boba Fett boba tea. Oh, my goodness. Okay, well, I'll finish that in a little bit.
You want me to take out the boba?
So, no, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you. All right, so, yeah, so I think space stations kind of give us a really cool opportunity for some fleet additions. But I think there's a couple of things that we would have to consider. One thing is, maybe come up with new ways to move them. Like, they might need a new base. And since most of the bases are rectangular, maybe a space station will have a square base. I don't see any problem with potentially changing up the way bases look in Armada. There's no written in stone rule that say all of the bases must adhere to this and this and this. As a matter of fact, we've got a whole new base size with the Superstar Destroyer not that long ago. Well, it was a little while ago, actually, if you think about it. But yeah, so it's certainly possible for them to come up with new bases. I think the Lucra Hulk is also another opportunity to get new bases. And honestly, the Lucra Hulk itself is almost like a space station that's going to be moving around. This Executor, the Superstar Destroyer, is absolutely got the mass that a space station would have. So like a space station wouldn't be that hard to do. In Star Wars Armada, I think it would require a different type of base. I would love to see either a square or even hexagonal base. I think a hexagonal base would be super cool. It would require a little bit of engineering, but I think a hexagonal base is something that the game could use. It would work really well for Lucra Hulks, and it would work well for multiple different space stations. And I think there is an opportunity to make multiple space stations. Thank you. If you got to go, that's fine. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. If you guys are just joining in, if you're just tuning in, we are talking about the return of Double Crit. The Double Critical podcast kind of had its season 1, and we are back now in just YouTube form. This one won't be going up as a podcast format, at least in the immediate future. But yes, we are back, and we're going to be doing every game from week to week. So today we are doing Star Wars Armada, and we're talking about space stations and a couple of other cool little things. I'm going to be talking about some customized homebrewed ships and some of the custom things that people like to do, and some alternative ways to kind of talk about that as well a little bit later on. So yeah, I think a new base is something that's in order for space stations, and just giving the game a little bit more flexibility. Because for one, a hex would work for a Lucra Hulk, but also dual faction stations too, right? Like a lot of Republic space stations that maybe now the Empire has control of, like you can make dual faction stations. I would love to make, especially if you're buying something that's a little bit more expensive, I would love to make it dual faction capable. And I think you could have I think you could even have Separatist and Rebellion stations. Now, I realize that the cool thing there is you're actually mixing light side and dark side when you do that. But thematically, there is a lot of example for Separatist technology falling into the Rebel hands. Cham Syndulla used quite a bit of that stuff. Maybe a round base like DS9 and Star Trek Attack Wing. Yeah, I said Star Wars Attack Wing. Yeah, no, a round base is a possibility. I think it works. It's harder to work that into to Armada specifically, but it could be done. It could be done. I like the idea of a hexagonal base a little bit better because it gives you those flatter, like more cleaner lines as far as firing arcs and measuring, and it's still kind of round. But then again, a round could actually work. What I have right now for Deep Space Nine is round. What about an octagonal base? Then you'd have flat edges for movement templates. Well, hexagon or octagon, either one is still going to work. Yeah, octagonal actually might be better. Because I would think for movement too, you would need the ridges for the movement dial on multiple places. You know, that's why initially I said square might be an option too, because you know they should be able to go left and right. They should be able to strafe, and that's one thing that you don't really see in Armada. You don't see a whole lot of strafing. You know, like some ships can kind of do really fancy stuff where it seems like they're strafing, right? Like a CR90 with engine techs can do some really bizarre things, and then it kind of seems like a strafe. And you know, we just with the wave 8, we got the Onager that could do the zero turn, which is kind of cool. But I don't know if we're gonna get you know, I don't know if we're gonna get that. But I think that would be one pretty cool way to do it, is allow a station to be able to move sideways or straight. But a stations would move really slow. So what if they were like, in addition to just being fancy objectives, what if they also could be included in a actual fleet? So I imagine like there'd be an expansion, let's say class 2 medical space station, you know, in a wave that has maybe 2 different space stations, you know, like one for rebels and separatists and one for Empire and Republic, for example, you know. And maybe it would have a scenario that involves the space station, and then it would also have maybe an Empire unit card and a Republic unit card, maybe and maybe 2 of each, so you can flip it over. So one could be more of a defenseless station, like support, and then maybe one could be an armed variant that's like a little bit more, has a little more firepower to it. Well, how would that work if you wanted to use that in a normal game? It'd be tough because in theory a space station is going to be really heavily armored, tough to kill. Potentially. I don't know if it would have very heavy firepower. It'd probably be well defended against squadrons, though. That's what I imagine. I would imagine it would have a very good anti-squadron battery, but probably not that long range. So I'm thinking like maybe 2 black and a blue, or something like that for like a station point defense turrets or something like that, or maybe 2 blue and a black. You know, a little more accurate for those, you know, for those station defense gunners or point defense gunners. They could have some upgrades. You definitely have to limit what kind of upgrades you could put on there. I think defensive retrofit would be good. I think double defensive retrofit seems like a good option. But definitely no, you know, support officer. You can't have engine techs on there and things like that. But capture the flag would be a really cool, fun variant to play, right? That would be a really cool. That would almost be like a green objective. That's like not legal for a tournament deck, but it'd be really good for fun, like for funsies. Like maybe you bring 3 green cards if you're playing for fun. If you're not doing a tournament standard game. I also think that you should consider having stations kind of follow the flotilla rule. Or a variation of the flotilla rule, in that having your station alive, but all your ships dead, you're still tabled, right? A station should not count against being tabled, because then you could just fortress and run multiple stations. And which also brings up, I think you should only be able to have, you know, 1 station if you were doing that. If you were going to run a station like as part of a normal build. Now, like, what would be the advantages of something like that? You know, obviously it would look pretty cool potentially. Stations might have some kind of deployment options too. Like maybe a station gets to, you know, bypass the normal. You have to be a distance 3 of your player edge. Well, maybe they have to be deployed beyond distance 3 of your player edge, and so. Like the stations out there, like they're coming to defend. Like the other team is attacking the station, you're defending the station. That kind of thing. Like I could see that being one way to do it. Oh, that's so interesting. There's a lot of bobas in that boba tea. Boba tea. Oh, it's all chewy. All right. So that's basically what I would the general format and how I think stations would work is. They'd probably be first and foremost objective style miniatures to go on the board, to either take the place of the existing station ones or to be all new types of station bases. I'm more interested in there being both variety, like a standard station that kind of represents the station in the artwork already, to take the place of that. But I'm also more interested in newer stations. Since we've got so many more in the Clone Wars, I'd love to have some new objectives, new types of stations, as well as the potential to be able to run one in a regular build for regular games with some serious limitations, like maybe little to no movement, the flotilla rule where it doesn't, where you can't just fortress with your station. But I think it'd be a cool opportunity to have a big support ship. And maybe that wouldn't even be that expensive, especially if they're an unarmed station that's going in your fleet and it's just there to provide support and look cool. It could potentially work. Would they have significant repair value for things like abandoned mining facility? Would mine with interdictors be really good against them? Yeah, I would think if a station was part of your fleet, and it's a very interesting question. If it's a part of your fleet, would it have the negative aspect of it? Would it still be potentially affected by gravity wells, right? Would it have to deploy before ships do? Would it be able to be maneuvered by somebody like Ezra Bridger, for example? Could Ezra throw a station into your own ships? And maybe that's part of the give and take, is maybe you put other things like that. You put more gravity well type stuff into an expansion or a wave like that. Maybe you make them risky for the benefit that they provide. I imagine that by bringing a station into your fleet, and especially if it's not mobile, by deploying a station, and we'll assume thematically it just came out of hyperspace, and it takes a long time for the station's hyperdrive to charge up, for it to jump again, kind of like the Death Star, right? Like they couldn't just be jumping the Death Star over and over again. They would take a while. So it lands, it's not gonna move again this game. But maybe you put a title that it does get one micro jump, right? Like that would be a pretty cool, like, micro jumps. We see a little bit of that in some of the Thrawn books where they micro jump within a system. Onagers, Nerf Herder says Onagers would love them. That is a very good observation, and that's definitely something to keep in mind, because you couldn't really go ahead and give a station evades, could you? Yeah. But it would be really fun to have them. I think it'd be fun just to have the miniatures on the board. And of course, there's ways to homebrew it. And if you're looking for ways to just homebrew station play for right now, I invite you to check out Crabbok.com, where we have the station stuff. So there is that. I want to move on a little bit and talk about homebrew stuff now too. So we've been talking in my Discord a little bit today about homebrew, and there's been some pretty interesting points, because there's a lot of people who make their own versions of cards. There are a lot of ships that existed in Legends. There's a lot of things that are in video games that have not made it into the games yet. A lot of things on people's wish lists of stuff they want to see made that isn't made yet. Is the Lucra Hulk technically a space station? No, but it's similar, right? In a lot of ways, it has a lot of that same functionality. So that could be, it could kind of fit the bill. It might even scratch that itch, But what I think is really interesting is, like, there's so many ships that we want to see that. So if people make custom cards, I'm going to make my own stuff for. That's fine, and it's great if you're doing home play or whatever, but the problem I've always had with homebrew stuff is what happens when, COVID restrictions are gone or whatever, and the world gets back to normal, which it is, at least in the United States, it's starting to. We've got, in Florida, I think we've got about in between 30 and 40% of people vaccinated now, which is getting good. I mean, we need to get up to 70%, which I'm afraid is going to be a long ways away, because so many people are for whatever reason don't want to get vaccinated. And I know some people have medical reasons not to want to do it, but everybody should get vaccinated if you have the opportunity. Definitely should. Because once we can all go back in game again, what happens when you go to a store and somebody's like, well, I brought my homebrew stuff? I'm like, I don't want to play your homebrew stuff. I want to play a real list, and so, like, there's that problem is, like, where homebrew can be fun for, like a casual game or somebody with, like, a friend or whatever, but it's not really as fun to bring and to show up and for group play and at a store and open play. So how can you scratch that itch? and I think it's a cool opportunity to to take these minis, because I just recently did a KDY alternate ship models and stuff, and we looked at the Incursor Star Destroyer, we looked at like the Imperial Nebulon Bs, and a lot of the stuff that is out there that has been reimagined, a lot of the E.C. Henry stuff, but I've also done some other stuff kind of like that. A Mel's Miniatures Corvus version of the Raider Corvette comes to mind. A lot of things that were like, oh, it'd be cool if they did this. Well, what if they do that? Let's jump to The Mandalorian, right? Moff Gideon's Architons. It is technically different than the standard Architons that we've seen. It's got more greebling. Same thing goes with that Gazanti from The Mandalorian. It's a slightly different than we've seen before. Now, we can attribute that to, well, it was live action and bigger budget, so they put a lot more greebling on there. Sure, but all the people who really analyze stuff are going to be like, well, this should have been this long, and this was here, and this is wrong. So maybe it's just a different variant. Look, they make ships. Who's to say this wasn't like a Mark II Alpha, or whatever of the existing previous model. There's going to be new models all the time and things like that. So, plus, as old as an Architons would have been by the time of The Mandalorian, I'm sure it's been retrofitted dozens of times, repaired, had parts replaced, etc. So how can you do that without having like, oh, well, I want to design a whole new ship for this? And, well, do we really need a whole new ship, especially one that's so similar to one that already exists? Well, a great way to do that is just get the miniature on there, right? Just swap the miniature, but keep the same ship card and basic ship rules. First off, those have already been play tested. Those are already widely accepted, well, universally accepted if it's an actual official product. It's universally accepted, so nobody's going to have a problem playing against you if you're running an Architons, right? Now, some people might not like if you're running a different, like a 3D printed model. I don't know many people who would actually complain if you were swapping your own models, as long as it wasn't confusing, right? And what I mean by that is, if you put an Architons on an Architons base, that's fine. If you swapped a Gladiator for another Architons 3D printed base, then that would be confusing, and I would have a problem with that. But most people aren't going to mind if you swap I used the Mel Miniatures Architons so I could have Gideon's kind of retrofitted Architons and then the other Architons, but they're both Architons, or maybe even one's like the Command variant and the other one's not, right? Or one's that's got a title and the other one doesn't. That's actually a really great way to make your fleet a little bit more distinct and to stand out a little bit more. But if you want to be a little more interesting with it, if your opponent is okay with you doing some kind of wild and crazy stuff, you can also swap out other minis, like put a Quasar into the Rebellion, right? Like the Phoenix Home. And what you do, instead of trying to come up with, how can we make the Quasar balanced for the Rebellion? Because like that might be a little bit broken considering certain Rebellion other squadron-based options that they have. There's other stuff like Adar Talon on their house. He's gonna all of these other things. So, would that be unfair, and would that debalance the game? Well, you don't have to worry about that. What if you just run a Quasar on the ship model and put that on an Assault Frigate Mark II? Right, you're still a medium ship. It's still going to fit on the base. And you're running an Assault Frigate Mark II, which is also an effective carrier, especially if you're running one in a carrier configuration with carrier-specific upgrades. Now you've got the model that kind of fits your Star Wars Rebels-based build, and that's pretty cool. And you can certainly do that. Maybe you want to run Alphabet Squadron build, but hey, this game doesn't have U-Wings yet. All right, well, swap out a VCX, a generic VCX, for a U-Wing. It's still going to function in most of the same role, but now you don't have to design your own U-Wing squadron for the game. And I'm sure we'll get U-Wings at some point, but there's a number of ways you can take custom ship options that that are for sale or 3D printed options, and be able to use them on the next closest type of ship, like the Incursor Star Destroyer that I just looked at from KDY. It'd be perfect to swap in for a Victory. Makes great sense. It's similar. It might look a little weird if you swapped it for an Imperial Star Destroyer, even though I believe it was based on the initial concept art that eventually became the Imperial Star Destroyer. But because it's so much closer to a Victory as far as its size and general appearance, think it would make a lot more sense to swap it in for that. And also it's a great way to add variety to your ships. Like the Imperial Nebulon B still looks very much like a Nebulon. So if you're running a bunch of Rebel Nebulons, if you're running an entire Nebulon fleet, maybe you want to change things up again. Like KDY had that Nebulon A and then a Nebulon B. That's the Imperial variant. Well, if I'm running 3 different Nebulons, maybe I've got one that's the Nebulon A, one that's the Imperial Nebulon, one that's the actual existing, Rebel Nebulon B model. And all 3 look very, very different. But as long as I'm using the ship cards for Nebulons, and I'm using the ship base and and the cardboard for Nebulons, I'm not making any of my custom rules. That's just a really cool way to make your fleet a little bit more visually distinct and give yourself a little more immersion on your tabletop. Especially, how many people wanted an Assault Frigate Mark 1? Because we got the Assault Frigate Mark 2. In the game's first wave, and at the time it was based off of Empire at War, and you had assault frigates, and everybody's like, well, where's the Assault Frigate Mark 1? We should have that too. That was a pretty big ship in Legends, and it certainly makes sense. Well, just swap an Assault Frigate Mark 1 in for an Assault Frigate Mark 2. Just use that card, right? I mean, like, it's really easy to do. It's not, if you have the stuff. I think that's probably the most balanced and fair way to be able to do that, especially for open play, if you're playing out in public and you're doing things like that. It would be no different. Jason says it would be no different than a different pate scheme than the normal factory ship, or like adding damage. Effectively it's you're just customizing your fleet to look a little bit more visually distinct. And the only real thing I think that makes that hard or confusing is if you make deliberately confusing choices. Just make sure your opponent is clear with on what is what, and make sure they're okay with it, because some people may not want to play against stuff from Legends. Maybe somebody's newer into Star Wars, doesn't know what those other ships are, and they wanted to play, or I know some people run Star Trek on their Star Wars Armada stuff, which is also super, super cool. And I really think Armada is totally based on, it would be so much better as a Star Trek game. But that's going to be the subject for a whole nother video, is just talking about Star Trek Armada and how would that work. But make sure your opponent's okay, because your opponent might not like Star Trek, and they may not want to play against Star Trek Armada. So have the regular models kind of on standby in case they don't want to. But that's just, that depends. Like if you're going to a tournament, always have the all official stuff ready to go, because there, according to like OP rules and tournament rules, you're not allowed to actually change out the models. But granted, that's one of those things, like it can be left up to the TO, because nobody's really going to complain that much. But you are allowed to repaint your stuff. So there's that. So it's a good time. And it's a fun way to customize your fleets. And I think with that, we're going to kind of wind things down. I want to thank today's sponsor, Luxury Playstyle. Luxury Playstyle they have done a lot of really cool stuff for this channel. They have a lot of amazing tokens, and you can go, if you use code Crabbok VIP, you're going to get one of these awesome Crabbok tokens. You got lightsaber nunchucks on there, and you've got the 5 on the back. You can use these to mark damage on your bigger battle games. How many times have you run a larger game and realized, oh goodness, at 1200 points, I'm going to run out of damage cards in my damage deck? So I'd like to use tokens to mark non-critical damage in larger games. So that's one thing that general damage tokens are good for. But yeah, they also have a lot of other games. We're working on some. There's a lot of X-Wing tokens. There's some new tokens that are coming in the works, so just stay tuned for that. But check out luxuryplaystyle.com and use code Crabbok VIP. It'll save you 15%. And on order of $35 or more with that code, you're going to get a free Crabbok lightsaber nunchuck token. All right, guys, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and big thanks to my patrons. You guys are awesome, and I couldn't do this without you, so thank you so much. I will talk to you soon, and as always, have a great day.